Kent and Marina, I am just so thrilled to be able to catch up with you for a few minutes on this special issue. Let me ask you, Kent, this is your first special issue with the Journal of Action Research. Why this topic?
Well, I had spent before this about 30 years working in the development enterprise itself, largely in sub-Saharan Africa, often with non-governmental organizations or the public sector. And over the course of that time, had, like other development professionals, had some frustrations, if you will, about the contradictions between long-term sort of structural types of changes that a lot of us believe are necessary in many places around the world, and kind of the short-term symptomatic nature of a lot of international aid. And at the same time, over the course of that 3 decades, Hillary, had been involved myself and had seen others involved in approaches that I thought had tremendous promise, showed in different kinds, important kinds of impacts on the ground that deployed action research in ways that often weren't even acknowledged by anybody, whether it's the donor or the NGO itself. And so that made me want to put together a special issue and build where we could bring together concrete experiences, practical experiences on the ground where there was important progress being made on what I would call complex problems and sort of some of the more rootsy structural aspects of them. Mm-hmm. That deployed action research. And so that was the major impetus, in the hopes that perhaps in some small way we could start using this empirical basis in a kind of a concerted way, get to some of the larger institutional issues within the aid enterprise that could kind of unleash action research, and, as we say in the introductory article, untame aid.
So Marina, your story really starts to come alive for me as I hear this contrast between the very conventional use of log frames and what you were doing. Do you have a story that, like, we could really picture what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the picture is really at the moments of when we were actually designing what the work would look like on the ground. Mm-hmm. So, I remember vividly sitting in Siem Reap in Cambodia on the floor with a bunch of flip charts out and people drawing networks, right? And this was designing a research program, right? And there were a few social researchers in the room, but there were certainly no fish experts in the room at the time, right? And that was just profoundly different to the way research had been planned before. It was when in the communities, the process started with, what is your dream? And what are the challenges to you achieving your dream? And the language that was used, right? It was in a moment in Zambia where we had, after 3 years of learning how to do this work together, right? The implementation teams from across 5 countries, you had Solomon Islands, the Philippines, and Bangladesh, coming together in Zambia and spending 3 days actually talking across the different places where people had been attempting to do the same thing, and actually all saying, we can see it. This way of working, we can actually describe it. We can talk about how the stories of Fisherman X in Siem Reap and your shrimp farmer in Bangladesh, how their stories actually should drive what we are designing to do, how our research process is actually going to support what matters to them.
So I'm getting you managed to open up what we could even call a subversive, highly creative space. Overall success?
I mean, yes, success in that the amount of learning that people took with them was immense. But just as I was saying, that meeting in Zambia, where we could see what it was, right? It was very soon after that then things started to unravel in the whole system that was funding us. And essentially, what we were doing was perceived as taking too long and was perceived as being way outside what what traditional researchers were used to, right? Which was, where's your question? Where's your output, right? Show me the impact. How are you going to measure it, right? And so at that time, they decided to reduce the funding significantly to the program, and over time, it was eventually closed down. So
let me stop and just like, let's just feel how common a story this seems to be, if I'm right with that, Kent. Great work happens, communicative space opens, and then it closes again. Do you think that there's good reason to feel as hopeful as we still do about the action research influence on the developmental community?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I'm more hopeful than I've ever been in 30 or so years of doing this kind of work, and here's why. I have long been convinced that action research and action research approaches have a lot to contribute to long-term development processes in ways that will lead to greater intergenerational equity. I'm convinced of that. The problem, I believe, for the past 20 years or so is we as action research have been incredibly inept at being able to actually articulate concretely and pragmatically what the aid enterprise could truly do differently. And the thing for me, Hillary, over the last, let's say, 5 or 7 years or some along those lines, I think we as a community are getting clearer and clearer on the asks that we have, the sort of practical ways forward. What does a decision maker, a donor, a high-level leader in the international aid enterprise, what should they do differently tomorrow and day after tomorrow? We've not been able to articulate that before, but I think that in the special issue that we're about to put out, there are some very pragmatic steps that leaders and decision makers can take, as well as those of us who are practitioners.